now that we have enterprise security set up, it's important to do the next step. Unfortunately, this next step is probably one of the most painful things you'll ever do in Splunk. I'm sure you'll find something that's more painful, but as a general rule, this is just, it's brutal. There's a reason that when you set up enterprise security for the very first time, Splunk will typically require you to take a pro service on for a couple weeks to help get you set up. And a lot of what they're doing is going to be doing this very process. I have an entire video series on data models, things like that. I will push to that as well to help you understand it. But the general principle is enterprise security was built to take in lots and lots of different data sources. They are not going to build a dashboard for every firewall, for every proxy, every security tool out there. They're not going to build a firewall. They're not going to build a dashboard for that. Instead, they're going to map things to what they call the common information model, which is a data model for types of data. You're going to have network traffic, you're going to have authentication, certificates, etc. And they will use the common information model, and all of their dashboards are based off of those. And then you can you get your data that you want to use CIM compliant, as they will call it, and that will work in enterprise security. You can hope that the provider for your data source in their TA or whatever has already modeled that stuff to be CIM compliant. If you are lucky and most of your stuff is already CIM compliant, awesome, this step will be very easy for you. If you're like me, I would say the customers I use, the stuff I use, is anywhere from mostly there to not there at all. A lot of stuff, if I have to pull the data out, clearly it's not going to happen. So, for example, my PF Sense, it doesn't have it. I'm going to have to make all that data model myself. Again, I would recommend Cribble. Cribble. I can't state that enough. I'm going to keep starting put videos out there. I'm just incorporating Cribble into my environment. Cribble is a lifesaver. It will make this task so much easier. My data comes in primarily already CIM compliant. I don't have to do aliasing. I don't have to go do all this changing of stuff. You're welcome to do it, but Cribble, why, when Cribble is a free product? It is actually, and we've actually found that it doesn't even cost you in the hardware perspective, because the amount of work that Splunk takes to modify these logs, Cribble is actually more efficient at it as well. So if say you're on a virtual environment and you only have so many cores to go, you set up a new Cribble box on that VM farm, and you cannibalize 8 cores from your Splunk instance to run Cribble. That's a pretty beefy Cribble box. You will get more resources back than you took from Cribble. Basically, what I'm trying to say is Splunk takes more resources to do the exact same thing Cribble can do. So when you put Cribble in place, if you already had the resources to run Splunk, Cribble is basically free for most of the cases that you would be doing, and it doesn't take any more resources than you already were using with your Splunk instance. It's just, to me, you just got to use it. It'll make your job so much easier. And I'm just going to get most of my stuff cribbled, and I'm not going to worry about going in here and settings and dealing with all the field aliasing and renames and evaluation. Something to remember, when you do a field alias, that is not done on the indexer. The index data is still being called foo, and if you want to change it to bar, that is actually being done in memory. So every time Splunk brings that data back, it's taking resources to rename those fields something else. Or you can use a tool like Cribble and just change the logs before they ever arrive to Splunk, and they're now CIM compliant using the names that Splunk wants, and thereby it's faster, quicker, etc. Okay, I've gone on that for a while. Let's talk about the next phase. So what I'm going to do is I have a little spreadsheet here. I'll bring it up in a second. What I go is I start marking down. Security domains is the first place I look at. There's a lot of pre-built dashboards that you can use if you have the data. Actually, I will use Access Center first. This is a bad one to go to begin with, and I'll tell you why. Primarily because Splunks itself. And so it has some authentication logs from your OS, which means you actually should have data all ready to begin here. But you don't have probably most of your authentication data. This is pretty much out of the box. I have authentication data, but it's my Splunk instance. I might want my Kerberos server, my domain controller, my OS login events. Well, guess what? They didn't come in. But if I just do what I'm telling you, go to these pages, and when the dashboards don't work, look to see why they don't work, this will lead you to believe you got everything you want. So unfortunately, the worst part, access, leads you to believe you're on the right path and you've got everything you need. But I would recommend all of these dashboards, you actually go in and look at how they're running and go grab your other data sources that are going to be authentication logs. Okay, so once I've done this, I hit edit. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to go just click this dashboard. And actually, this is a little more. Oh, it's because they're using, this is cool actually. I hadn't noticed this. In the latest version of Enterprise Security, this dashboard is being done with Dashboard Studios, not Dashboard Classic. So it's not under edit. You hit the edit, you're actually going to be looking at these little, you're going to go to data overview, this little database symbol, and there's your databases. And here, if you're familiar with the way they do, you've got your base search here or your full search, and sub searches off your base would be down here. Here it's using save searches to acquire those. I'm just going to go grab this action here. If I hit the little drawing marker, it's going to tell me CIM access action. Unfortunately, this is going to require an expansion of the macro. It's written in macro format. So let's just go here. I'm going to duplicate this tab. As I said, this is painful. If you're going, oh, this hurts. Welcome to a really awesome tool, but it's not easy to get going. It takes work. So I'm just going to come here, write search. And if you're using a Windows or a Linux box, you can hit Control-Shift-E, and that will expand your macro. There's nothing special about here. I would assume this CIM access at lookup actually exists. I hope so. Let's check. Yeah, I get results from that. So now we go and grab the next one. Cancel here. We move down to the next. This is access apps. I have a feeling this is also going to work. Control-Shift-E. And that's what it runs. It's an input lookup. You can go ahead and run it. It works. And you're just going to go down the line until you find something that you don't have working. Right category fits in the same boat. Yeah. We're just going to keep going down. Access over time by action. Here we go. What you really want to be looking for is these tstats commands. And I'm going to break this down here. And I don't like the way this is written, so I'm going to go. If you use Control backspace, it will actually put a new line on each one of these. Yeah, so anyway, we've got a tstats. Don't worry about this. This will expand, and there will be other. In my next video, I'll talk about. They've gotten written here. It will not only will you have to data model this, you will need to use the accelerated data. It will only look at data that has been accelerated. There are ways of turning that on and off. If you don't want to accelerate all your data, I would recommend, if you're really serious about enterprise security, you really should have the resources to accelerate these data models. But there may be the case where you don't. And so there are ways to change this. And that's why they put it in a macro format, is you can actually go and change the macro and say that it must use summarized data, true or false, and it flips. And so that's why tstats is written here with a macro. There's a whole lot more data that goes along with that tstats. But just recognize I'm a tstats, which means I'm looking at the accelerated data. And then we come to, it's using the data model authentication. From a programming world, this makes a lot of sense for me to explain it this way. Here is your parent, then it's got a dot, it uses dot notation to imply this is a child. That's how I read it. I don't know if that's actually how the documentation meant it to be read, but I read a parent-child relationship. So how do I deal with these data models? So I know that the first part is the parent. So I'm looking for a parent called a data model. So let's go over here. Easiest thing I've done, I'm going to do it two ways. If you hit settings, data models, it'll bring up a list of all the parents. These are all your parents. So there's my authentication. If I look over here, I can see, oh, it's got a check mark that's yellow, this little lightning bolt, it's yellow. That means Splunk is accelerated. By default, Enterprise Security will automatically accelerate a bunch of your data models. And every time ES restarts, these will accelerate. You can turn them off and Splunk will re-accelerate them. There is some config files, at least earlier in Enterprise Security, that would turn these off. Again, I'll put that as a video. I'm going to keep adding to this video channel. And if you want to turn them off and keep them off after reset, look for the video below that shows how to do that. Anyway, I'm going to go click authentication. And all of these, here's the parent, these are all the children. And if it doesn't have a child, it's kind of weird. It doesn't look like it's got a child, but for example, I click failed authentication, this flips to failed authentication. And that's all the fields available to you in failed authentication. Successful authentication, that's all the fields available to you. Default authentication, those are the fields. They kind of look all the same, and often they are, but there are reasons they break these up into children. In this case, the parent and the child share the same name. So you're going to the parent authentication and you're using the fields available, the children available in the authentication family. I don't know the best way to explain it. I hope that's making sense, that this is authentication and here's the little child authentication. This is authentication. In this case, the child is failed authentication. I know it's looking here, but they're indented. So if I wanted to call the fields that are these specific fields, I would need to go authentication dot failed underscore authentication. That's what this bottom thing is here is to tell you how do you write this. So for example, this has two spaces. The spaces are written with underscores. Authentication here, it's just authentication. And so let's see that. Let's go back to our little query. We're looking for data. It wants to get all of the data, give me a count from the authentication dot authentication. So it's basically saying, just grab everything, anything that fits into this data model, and these are the fields I have to work with. It will not call anything in tstats that isn't in this list of fields. And then we're going to go, it's going to look at DS, input tokens, result action. So we're still nothing here. Now we're looking for the word authentication because we know we're using the authentication model. And so we're looking for any fields. These are all tokens. So no big deal there. These don't need to be CIM compliant. But now we come down here and it's calling an authentication.action. So it's saying, hey, look in the authentication and look for the action field. What's the action field? So here are your extracted and here are your calculated. And I can't, because it's accelerated, I can't go open it. I'd have to stop the acceleration, which I don't have a problem doing. I'll stop the acceleration. Turn this off. Now I can edit these. You cannot edit while they're accelerated. If I click edit, we can see that what it's doing is it's got a case statement. If there is no field action or action is blank, you're going to write it as unknown. Otherwise, it'll be the action field. So it's looking for an action field, but action is so important that we can't have it not assigned. When you do a data model, you try to map your things to as many fields as possible. But if you don't have it, you don't have it. This is saying, hey, action is so important, we can't have a null. Nulls are not good. And one of the reasons we know null is bad is, look, it's doing a by. If you've ever done a stats count by and have a field that's null, the values don't return. So you cannot have a null field on a by. And so that's why authentication.action is down here in that. We've got to put an eval expression in here. You don't have to do it. Again, this is all done by Splunk, but it states it's so important that action must be done. Otherwise, it will default to unknown. And unknown is not very useful, so you're going to want to make sure that your CIM model takes some form of action. And action would often be successful, unsuccessful, because it's authentication. So find that field and map it to it. And we're going to go into more details there. But anyway, so I know now that I need, and so we come to my little spreadsheet here, I need the data model authentication. Not sure why I'm centered there, authentication. And I need the field action. That is definitely required for me to do my work. And I'm just going to call these dashboards the security domains access, so I can remember where they're coming from. Oh, let's see here. So write this, security domains. Maybe I don't want all of these dashboards. I'll show you a way you can turn them off. But if I'm going to use this dashboard, I need to have it filled out. And so I need to have, I need to use the authentication model, and I definitely need an action field. All right, going back to my query. Anything else? Time chart, authentication, action, authentication. All right, so for this query to work, we just need an action field. So if we had our data mapped to authentication and we have an action field, that one will work. What about this one right here? I'm going to speed this up. We'll do it one more time where we move it over to save search to the SPL editor. Control backspace, puts that nice. All right, so again, they're using the authentication model. You're going to find a common theme. Most of these dashboards will use a data model, and it's just going to be continued authentication for these dashboards to light up. Again, these are tokens, 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 token. Oh, there's the word authentication, and it wants the word app. All right, let's go to this edit object. Where is app found? Oh, look, it's a calculated field as well. I hope you're seeing a trend here. When it uses that by field, it's gonna need it. And so what it's doing says, hey, if you named your app field, cool. We're gonna call it, or if you didn't name your app field, or it's blank, we're gonna call it source type. Otherwise, use the field that they provided, because we cannot have app be blank. So let's go make our note. We need an app field. Authentication. And I'm gonna get lazy. I don't want to type them all the time, so I'm just gonna drag that down. And I would, for me, when I speed through this, I'm just going to just worry about the fields until the data model changes. All right, close this search, go back to Access Center, close this. Top access by source. I hope you can still read this. I don't want to put this in search every time. There's my authentication. Actually, I can see some advantages. With my web browser, when I highlight authentication, it kind of highlights authentication everywhere else. That's kind of a cool feature, but I can see them here. There's authentication.source. So I definitely need a source field. Is there anything else? Nothing else, authentication dot. So let's go look at source. Source here. Again, oh, it's an evaluated field. And what do they do? Its source will be unknown if we can't have it null. All right, so we know we need source. All right, I'm not going to go through every dashboard here. Now, what we want to do is we want to go to Splunk documents, and I just say Splunk Common Information Model and Google it, and basically you'll get back data models. I'll put this link specifically in the description below. But last one I was working on was certificates. I have to say certificates is probably, I know we were talking about authentication, but I want to talk about certificates because this is by far probably one of the greatest ones. I haven't even looked at authentication, to be honest, so maybe I'll take that back. But certificates was really cool because I have Corelight logs, which are Bro Zeek logs, and they are not CIM compliant for certificates being your SSL, TLS, things like that. What you do is you read here, it comes and gives you an understanding that you have a parent class of certificates with data sets of certificate or SSL or TLS. And you basically come down here, and here are all the fields. All certificates has a dest, It tells you that should be a string, and it gives you kind of a short description, the target and the certificate management event, the business unit. And so you can read each one of these and see what they're supposed to be. Sometimes they'll even give examples. But where I really like this particular write-up is it took an example of a log I actually have, Zeek Correlate. Yep, that's almost exactly, the fields are slightly different unless I was grabbing the specific Outlook. And it looks very, very similar. So I can say, all right, I got a TS ID certificate version. And when you're done, these are your SSL fields. Sorry, these are your certificate fields, what they should be called. And so when I look through here and I'm trying to match them up to these names, I sometimes have to do some guessing. I'm like, certificate version, that's pretty obvious. But where do I get this SSL start time? Well, I know it's 158, so I just look through here and find the field. Oh, okay. So certificate not valid before, I need to alias it to SSL start time and then SSL end time. Okay, so this is how I get the issuer. When I read common name, if I read SSL issuer common name, this is the certificate issuer's common name. Well, I kind of figured that. Not exactly really helpful. I might have to do some research on the words. What is a common name? Do some Google foo. Well, luckily it went back and it said, here is the common name, DigiCert Cloud Services CA1. And you look through here and you go, oh, okay, so common name, that makes sense. It's in the issuer. Extract out the CN, because CN stands for common name. And then I grab everything here. That's the common name. Okay, that makes sense. I can do that. And so it gives a really good guidance. Not all of these are all on the same par. So we will see what the authentication looks like. Authentication comes back. We've got a few different types. We've got default authentication, insecure authentication, privileged authentication. These are kind of cool. This is out of the scope of this video, but you might have admin accounts. You're going to want to trigger those as privileged privileged authentication. Things that are using insecure authentication, some outdated methods, whatever the case may be. Heaven forbid you use landman hash or something, that would be under, you could tag it as insecure. More likely it's clear text like FTP. If I had FTP logs, I would definitely be tagging my stuff as insecure authentication. And then you just got your default authentication. And so it allows you to break this stuff down and get more granular. But anyway, here's the authentication and what we see here. This got a little better description than some of the certificates, and that's appreciated. We read action string, the action performed on the resource, prescribed value, success, failure, pending, error. We actually saw that when we went into action that it gave, it's using a lookup. But these are what they recommend you do. They prescribe that you use everything as success, failure, pending, and error. Don't use true, false. Use the same words so they can match across multiple systems. And so they're going to tell you use an action, but also make sure you use these 4 words. Then the app. What's the app? Well, application involved in the event. That might be SSH, might be Splunk, might be WinLocal, maybe AWS. It's highly recommend you have this. So you can just keep coming down. You can see, all right, we talked about source as well. The source involved in the authentication is the case of the endpoint protection. The source is the client. So it might be source IP, source host, source NT host. And I like this. Don't confuse this with where the data came from, the source or source type fields. We come down, let's see, does it have, and see, unfortunately, it doesn't have a mapping. And I get it. There's so many different authentication logs. They can't do it all. I wanted to show you certificates because some of these are really well documented down below. Some of them are better. I understand what each of these fields are here. They do get a little tricky. The nice thing is, if you're not 100% sure what the field is, you kind of got a query and examples of what it should be. So you know, okay, if I need to make a source work, you can play around with the queries and try to figure it out. Again, there is no perfect answer. That's why this is a tough task to do. It's not easy. They often bring pro services in because they help make this job a lot easier. I'm not saying you need to buy pro service to get stuff in. I'm just saying that's why it's there. Anyway, so what you want to do, you're going to go through every dashboard, particularly start with security domains. Just grab all these dashboards. All right, so I grabbed a Dashboard Studio here. You might have Dashboard Classic, either one. I'll show Dashboard Classic in just a second. You're going to go through all of the dashboards, find the data models you need, and then the fields that you need to have specifically mapped. Then you're going to need to go and alias your fields that don't match and tell all the fields that are required. As soon as you map your stuff so it's mapped to the authentication model, and you have a source in there, which by the way, source will default, so it'll fill it anyway. These will fill out with your data. So that's the process. I find it easier because there's a lot of them. Okay, I know it can be overwhelming. What fields do I need to alias? Well, the most important fields I get working are the ones specifically called out by these dashboards. So I'm going to go down all the dashboards, write down the data model, write down the field, what dashboards they're related to. That way, if I choose I don't want the dashboard, I don't have to worry about doing the effort. Chris, if you already know beforehand you don't want the dashboard, don't waste your time doing the other two columns. Anyway, then you go to the documentation, look those fields up, and then start look at your data and say, okay, that field is source, that field is this, and you'll start making those changes. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. It's a long video. I have lots of different references. If you have questions, write down in the comments below. Look at my data model video channel that I have, the playlist. Look down in the details. Look for the link to the Splunk documentation if you can't find it. And I have lots of videos that cover doing these aspects. I'm not going to put them all in this video channel. I might put some, but the point is I'm going to link you to other video playlists I have that explain this exact task of getting your stuff data modeled and CIM compliant and things like that. And again, I will cover how to do it in Cribble. And I also have the lame log analysis made easy Splunk app. You can go to Splunk base and it's got an event gen. And most of those, and I continue to add more data sources each week, each update. I pretty much update this on Splunk base once a month. I will continue to load you in sources. So I have network traffic logs, I have web traffic logs, and they're already CIM compliant. So all I have to do is turn the event gen on, and Security Essentials will read it. Enterprise Security will read that, and you can see what these dashboards will look like with real air quotes, with data that is CIM compliant. Anyway, I hope this is helpful. Hope it takes you from being a lame analyst to a Splunk ninja. As always, if this is something that you are spending a lot of time in, I highly, highly recommend you join my Discord channel. This stuff is not something that can be easily explained. If it's a little difficult for you, that's normal. But reach out to me on my Discord channel. I'd love to help you. I can even set up time to walk you through on your own network. I'm here to help. I love doing this stuff, but I do recognize that can be a very difficult road. Anyway, if you like this stuff, subscribe to the channel. Keep coming back. Love to hear your feedback. Thanks so much. Have a great day.